Some places become famous because of what was built there. Others become famous because of what disappeared. There are places on Earth that almost feel like they should come with a warning label. And if anywhere has earned a reputation like that, it's the Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle is a stretch of ocean between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. A patch of water that's become famous for stories of ships disappearing, planes vanishing, crews never being seen again, and mysteries that seem to only get stranger every time someone retells them. Or at least that's the legend. Tonight, we're diving into one of the world's most famous mysteries, no compass required. Actually, considering where we're going, a compass might just make things worse. Hello and welcome back to Pretty Strange, where we dive into history, mystery, and curious conspiracies. I'm your host, Taylor, and today we're talking about one of the most infamous stretches of ocean on the planet, the Bermuda Triangle. It's creepy. It's mysterious. It's inspired countless books, documentaries, and conspiracy theories. So let's jump right into it. Way before the Bermuda Triangle became the star of documentaries, conspiracy theories, and your one weird uncle who insists aliens are involved, it was just the ocean, which honestly is scary enough. The ocean never needed supernatural powers to ruin someone's day. It's massive, unpredictable, and completely indifferent to whether you packed enough snacks for the trip. The Atlantic Ocean especially has always been one of the rougher places to travel. Violent storms, powerful currents, limited visibility, and navigational mistakes have been making sailors question their life choices for centuries. But here's what's interesting. For most of history, nobody thought this stretch of water was cursed. They just thought it was the ocean. That reputation didn't change overnight. Instead, it happened little by little as sailors began recording strange compass readings, unexpected weather changes, and moments where navigation suddenly just didn't make much sense. One of the earliest stories people point to comes from Christopher Columbus during his first voyage across the Atlantic in 1492. Yeah, that doofus. According to his journals, Columbus noticed unusual compass readings and even reported seeing a strange light in the distance one night. Today, historians think that light was probably something completely natural, maybe a meteor or maybe another atmospheric phenomenon. But centuries later, people look back at those same journal entries and went, see, he noticed something weird too. Maybe he was onto something. That's really the first lesson of the Bermuda Triangle. A normal event happens, a few hundred years pass, and then someone gives it a much cooler explanation. Because if you're crossing the Atlantic in the 1400s with wooden ships, basic navigation tools, and absolutely no GPS, a lot can go wrong. That doesn't automatically mean you've discovered an interdimensional portal. It usually just means you're sailing across one of the most unforgiving oceans on Earth. Still, those early stories became the building blocks of something much bigger. Once people start believing a place is strange, every unusual event feels like another piece of evidence. Humans are really good at connecting dots. Sometimes we're even good at connecting dots that don't need to be connected. Here's something that surprises a lot of people. The Bermuda Triangle as we know it today is actually a pretty modern idea. That doesn't mean ships and planes weren't disappearing before then. It just means that nobody was connecting all of those incidents into one giant mystery. The legend really started taking shape in the 1950s and 60s. Air travel was becoming more common, shipping traffic was increasing, and news about disappearances could spread farther and faster than ever before. In 1964, a journalist named Vincent Gaddis published a magazine article that used the phrase Bermuda Triangle. And honestly, that might have been the most important thing that ever happened to this legend, because once you give something a name, you give it a story. Suddenly, it wasn't just a random stretch of the Atlantic where accidents sometimes happened. Now, it was the Bermuda Triangle. Capital letters, dramatic music. Ooh, spooky. It became less of a location and more of a character, a place where strange things happened, a mystery waiting for its next chapter. And the media ate that shit up. Books, magazine covers, TV documentaries, tabloids, late-night TV specials narrated by someone whose voice alone could give you nightmares. The legend took on a life of its own. Now here's the part that often gets left out. There is no official boundary for the Bermuda Triangle. No government agency recognizes it, and no maritime organization has marked it on nautical charts as some kind of danger zone. There isn't even one universally agreed upon map. Depending on who's telling the story, the triangle's borders can actually shift a bit, which is convenient to say the least. Because if nobody can agree exactly where it ends or begins, it's pretty easy to keep adding mysterious events to the list. And honestly, that's very on brand for us humans. We love turning uncertainty into mythology, especially when the setting is a giant dark ocean that already does a fantastic job of creeping us all out. If the Bermuda Triangle became one of the world's most famous mysteries, it wasn't because hundreds of ships disappeared overnight. It was because of a handful of cases that refused to give people answers. Let's start with the case that made the Bermuda Triangle legendary, Flight 19. December 5th, 1945. 5 U.S. Navy bombers lift off from Florida on what should have been one of the least interesting flights imaginable. Seriously, this wasn't a secret mission. Nobody was chasing enemy aircraft. Nobody expected history to remember this day at all. It was a routine training exercise, the kind that's supposed to end with everybody landing safely, filling out paperwork, and probably complaining about that paperwork. Instead, it became one of aviation's greatest mysteries. At first, everything seemed normal. Then the radio calls started changing. The flight leader began reporting compass problems. Soon after, he admitted he wasn't entirely sure where they were. That's not something you want to hear from the person leading 5 planes over open water. As more radio transmissions come in, the confusion only grew. The pilots tried to figure out their position. They debated which direction was west. They questioned their instruments, and with every message, you can almost hear the situation slipping further out of their control. That's what makes Flight 19 so unsettling. It's not just that 5 airplanes disappeared, it's that we can hear the moment confidence slowly turns into uncertainty. The crews weren't panicking right away. They were trying to solve a problem. But the longer they searched for their location, the more impossible that problem seemed to become. Then, the radio transmission stopped. All 5 aircraft were gone. As if that wasn't unsettling enough, the Navy launched a search almost immediately. One of the rescue aircrafts, a BPM Mariner carrying 13 crew members, also disappeared. And that is the part of the story that launched 1,000 conspiracy theories. But suddenly, it wasn't just one mystery, it was 2. It sounds exactly like the kind of story that makes people start asking whether something supernatural is lurking beneath the waves. But most likely the explanation is actually much less dramatic. Investigators believe the flight leader probably became disoriented after mistakenly identifying the islands below him. Add in faulty compass readings, worsening weather, limited fuel, rough seas, and a series of unfortunate decisions, and what you have isn't evidence for an interdimensional portal. It's just a tragic chain reaction. One mistake leads to another, then another, until there isn't enough time or fuel to recover. As for the missing rescue plane, BPM Mariners had a reputation for fuel vapor explosions, earning the unfortunate nickname the flying gas tank. In fact, a ship nearby reported seeing an explosion shortly after the rescue aircraft took off, making an in-flight accident a far more likely explanation than the Bermuda Triangle claiming another victim. But the legends rarely care about the most likely explanation. Flight 19 had everything a good mystery needs: military aircraft, lost radio transmissions, no immediate wreckage, a second disappearance. Just enough unanswered questions for people to fill in all the blanks themselves. If Flight 19 is the Bermuda Triangle's most famous mystery, the USS Cyclops might be its most haunting. because this wasn't 5 airplanes, this was an enormous Navy cargo ship carrying more than 300 people. And somehow, it simply disappeared. No distress call, no confirmed wreckage, no survivors, and no explanation anyone could prove. And that's terrifying. The USS Cyclops wasn't some legendary battleship. It wasn't packed with cutting-edge technology or secret military experiments. It was basically the hardworking coworker of the Navy. Built in Philadelphia, the Cyclops was a massive cargo ship, over 500 feet long, designed to haul coal and other heavy supplies wherever they were needed. Not exactly glamorous, but incredibly important. Ships like this kept the Navy running, which means the Cyclops was never supposed to become a mystery. It was supposed to deliver cargo, go home, and be forgotten by history. Instead, it became one of the biggest maritime disappearances the United States had ever seen. When the U.S. entered World War I, the Cyclops was assigned to transport supplies across the Atlantic. During a trip to Brazil in early 1918, the ship loaded something much heavier than coal, manganese ore, an incredibly dense material used to make steel. Now here's where things start to get concerning. The ship was already having mechanical problems. One of its engines wasn't working properly because of a cracked cylinder, and there were also reports of structural issues. Some historians even believe parts of the hull may have already been compromised as well. So, despite what the legend suggests, this wasn't necessarily a perfectly healthy ship that the ocean just randomly decided to swallow. It may have been struggling long before anyone realized it. After leaving Brazil, the Cyclops stopped in Barbados to take on supplies before beginning the final leg of its journey to Baltimore. Then, on March 4th, 1918, it sent one final message. Weather fair, all well. That's it. Nothing dramatic, no frantic radio calls, no warning that something had gone wrong, just everything is fine. And then, silence. No more messages, no distress signal, no wreckage. Nothing. That's what makes this case so eerie. Not because we know something impossible happened, but because we have almost no idea what happened at all. The story just ends. When the Cyclops failed to arrive, the Navy launched an extensive search. At first, many people suspected a German U-boat attack. It was World War I after all, so that wasn't an unreasonable theory. But investigators never found evidence of any attack. No submarine records, no debris, no confirmed wrecks. More than a century later, the Cyclops still hasn't been found. And that's one of the biggest reasons people can't let this story go. Humans really don't like unfinished endings, especially when more than 300 people just vanish. In fact, the disappearance of the Cyclops remains the largest non-combat loss of life in U.S. naval history. Now, I hate to tell you this, but the most likely explanation is also the least exciting. Historians think the Cyclops was probably the victim of several problems happening at exactly the wrong time. Overloaded cargo, mechanical failures, possible structural weakness, heavy seas, maybe even a sudden shift in that incredibly dense manganese ore. Any of those problems would have been serious. Combined, they could have been catastrophic. The Atlantic doesn't need superpowers. Sometimes physics is scary enough. The Cyclops became legendary because it leaves our brains with nowhere to go. It was enormous. Hundreds of people were on board. It was traveling a routine route. Its final message said everything was fine. And then, nothing. No final chapter, no satisfying explanation, just an empty space where the ship used to be. Maybe that's why this story has survived for more than 100 years. Not because it proves the supernatural, but because it reminds us that the ocean can leave us without answers and we just have to accept it. And actually, that's unsettling enough. By the middle of the 20th century, something interesting started happening. It wasn't that more ships and planes were suddenly disappearing, it was that people had started paying attention. As air travel became more common, more aircraft passed through the region. Shipping traffic also exploded. And here's the thing. When you have more people traveling through an area, you're naturally going to have more accidents. That's not paranormal, it's statistics. But stats don't sell nearly as many books as mysterious disappearances. Once the Bermuda Triangle had a reputation, every incident, even the ones that happened near its loosely defined borders, started getting lumped into the same growing legend. A small private plane disappears? Must have been the Triangle. A cargo ship sinks during bad weather? Triangle. Someone miscalculates their fuel over open water? Believe it or not, that also has to be the Triangle. It's a little like buying a red car and suddenly noticing red cars everywhere. The cars were always there, you're just paying attention now. And that's exactly how the myth grows. Not because every story is connected, but because people started connecting them. This is where things get a little less spooky and a lot more interesting. The area between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico is one of the busiest stretches of ocean and airspace in the Western Hemisphere. Thousands upon thousands of ships and aircraft travel through it every year, which means, statistically speaking, incidents are going to happen. Researchers have actually compared the Bermuda Triangle with other heavily traveled regions around the world, and here's what they found. The Bermuda Triangle isn't dramatically more dangerous than any other region. It's just dramatically more famous. That's the pretty important distinction, because fame has a funny way of rewriting history. Once a place becomes known for mystery, every accident starts to feel connected, even when it isn't. If you've ever heard someone say, "Scientists can't explain the Bermuda Triangle," that's not really true. Scientists actually have a lot of explanations. The catch is, none of them involve aliens. Sorry about it. Let's talk about the weather. The Atlantic Ocean in this region is notorious for producing sudden storms, hurricanes, waterspouts, and rapidly changing conditions. A beautiful morning can become a dangerous afternoon surprisingly fast. Now, add powerful ocean currents. The Gulf Stream races through the area like a giant conveyor belt. If a ship sinks or a plane crashes, debris doesn't politely stay where it landed, waiting to be discovered. The current moves it, sometimes quickly, sometimes for hundreds of miles, which means by the time the search crew arrives, the evidence may already be somewhere else. Then there's navigation. Before GPS, pilots and sailors relied on compasses, radio navigation, and a healthy amount of confidence. Unfortunately, confidence isn't always accurate. Compass variations are real. Navigation mistakes are real. Weather is real. And human error is very, very real. Put all those things together over hundreds of miles of open ocean, and suddenly, the Bermuda Triangle starts looking a lot less supernatural. Not because the danger disappears, but because the danger becomes understandable. But maybe that's even scarier, because you can't argue with physics. And physics doesn't care how good your vacation plans were. But of course, that doesn't stop the theories. Some people blame methane gas erupting from the seafloor. Others point to unusual magnetic anomalies. Then you've got Atlantis, which I'm not even going to touch on right now because that is a whole episode itself. It's coming, I promise. Interdimensional portals, time warps, aliens, because apparently extraterrestrials have developed a very specific interest in just this one patch of the Atlantic. Now, to be fair, some ideas like methane hydrates are based on real scientific concepts, but none of these ideas explain every disappearance. The more outlandish theories, those are fun. They're entertaining and fantastic movie plots, but they're just not backed by any convincing evidence. But maybe that's okay, because I don't think people keep coming back to the Bermuda Triangle because they expect to solve it. I think they come back because it's just a really good story. At this point, The Bermuda Triangle has become something bigger than just a place on the map. It's become a symbol. It represents some of our oldest fears: getting lost, being completely at the mercy of nature, realizing technology doesn't always have the answers, and maybe the hardest one of all, accepting that sometimes we simply don't know. That's really what the Bermuda Triangle is. Not the proof of the supernatural or evidence of aliens, not a giant portal hiding in the Atlantic. It's what happens when real tragedies collide with human imagination. We don't like unanswered questions, so we build stories around them. Sometimes those stories become legends, and sometimes those legends become so powerful that they start feeling more real than the facts themselves. Maybe that's why this mystery refuses to disappear. Not because we've failed to explain it, but because we've never stopped wanting there to be something left to explain. Even today, satellites circle the planet. Ships carry technology sailors 100 years ago couldn't even imagine. Planes cross oceans every single day, and yet the sea still has a way of reminding us who's really in charge. Not because it's haunted, but because it's enormous. It's unpredictable. Because there are still places out there that don't care how badly we want answers. And honestly, there's something strangely comforting about that. So, what is the Bermuda Triangle really? It's not an interdimensional doorway. It's not an alien parking lot. And despite what half the documentaries on cable television would like you to believe, it's probably not cursed. It is a heavily traveled stretch of ocean with unpredictable weather, powerful currents, difficult navigation, and a reputation that's grown far larger than the evidence behind it. But here's the funny part. If none of that were true, we probably wouldn't still be talking about it. The Bermuda Triangle isn't famous because it's the most dangerous place on Earth. It's famous because it's one of the best stories we've ever told. A place where bad luck became mystery, mystery became mythology, and mythology became pop culture. Which, if we're being honest, is a pretty impressive journey for 3 imaginary lines across the Atlantic. Some places become famous because of what was built there. Others become famous because of the stories we refuse to stop telling and the gossip surrounding it. Thank you so much for spending time with me here on Pretty Strange. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a rating, and let me know what strange history, mystery, oddity, or conspiracy you'd like me to dive into next. I'm always looking for my next hyperfixation. Until next time, stay curious, question everything, and maybe don't blame aliens until you've checked the weather. I'll see you in the next one.